ThunderCats began in the 80s and really clawed their way into the hearts and minds of young children. Then they tried to roar back in 2011, hoping and expecting to milk the same craze they enjoyed 3 decades prior. The original 1985 ThunderCats ran for 4 seasons, 130 episodes in all, and was a textbook example of the era's toy-driven animated series industry. In those days, the show's Adventure of the Week format also served as a 22-minute toy commercial. On the screen, Lion-O and crew battled evil, which in turn enticed kids to beg for action figures, vehicles, and playsets. It was cool, you see, and kids wanted to show off the action figures and the toys of the heroes they were watching. Now, this was a time when computers and mobiles were not a thing, which meant that the kids were not used to seeing their heroes anywhere else, apart from the TV screens, and they were not really saturated. Naturally, the whole toys and cartoon networks were a hugely successful mission back then. In the mid-80s, ThunderCats, produced by Rankin Bass and animated in Japan by Topcraft, became one of the decade's cartoon juggernauts, part of the unregulated direct marketing to kids phenomenon. Those of you who were kids back in the 80s would now fondly remember the show's fantasy sci-fi premise. You know, the whole cat-like heroes on Third Earth fighting the evil mummy Mum-Ra, but even fonder memories might be of those finding piles of ThunderCat toys under the Christmas tree. So, because of such a great response, there came the 2011 version, which added more backstory to the heroes and had a darker feel about it while retaining the factors that made the original work. But it ended right after 1 season. So what the hell happened to ThunderCats 2011? Well, that's what we're here to find out. But before I continue, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's carry on. So the 2010s were a decade of nostalgia. Creative people who had grown up watching the stuff were now in charge of creating things, and that's why we got IPs like Transformers and He-Man, among others. By the late 2000s, studios were mining every beloved 80s franchise for a reboot. Fans who grew up on ThunderCats had watched other childhood favorites return in more contemporary forms. For instance, G.I. Joe returned with an adult-oriented animated special and a live-action film around 2009, and Michael Bay's Transformers films dominated the box office. Warner Brothers, which had acquired the ThunderCats property in 1989 after absorbing Lorimar Telepictures, finally decided it was Thunderian time. In 2011, in partnership with the Cartoon Network, they launched a reimagined ThunderCats aimed not just at a new generation of kids, but also at those older fans hungry for a more mature take on Lion-O's saga. From the outset, the ThunderCats reboot from 2011 set a different tone. I won't say sacrificed, but it definitely traded the original cartoon's mostly episodic storytelling for a serialized, epic that would go on for multiple seasons. The new show's creators, namely Michael Jelenic and Ethan Spalding, planned an ambitious 3-season arc, which they even structured as chapters with continuous plot development and character growth. This was no longer what they called a Villain of the Week reboot. This one here aimed to deepen the lore and the stakes. In contrast to the straightforward good versus evil morality plays of the 80s, the 2011 series added complexity by exploring prejudice between species, questions of leadership, betrayals, and ancient secrets. So you see, it was targeted towards a slightly older audience than the 80s cartoon. Even the visual style was chosen to ensure that this new show looked like an upgrade. Warner Brothers Animation came together with renowned Japanese studio, Studio 4 Degrees C, to give the show an anime-inspired flair. The result was artwork and action sequences far more fluid and cinematic than the old shows. Now we had dynamic angles and detailed character designs. The ThunderCats themselves were redesigned. So Lion-O, for example, appeared as a leaner teenage version of the character, instead of a boy magically aged into an adult body as in the original. The new designs kept elements that worked for the first one, for instance, Lion-O's spiky red hair and claw shield, but infused them with a modern anime aesthetic that I think was both beautiful and very fluid in motion. If you think about it, it was the ThunderCats for the anime era, and longtime fans were quick to notice and appreciate touches like the characters' expressive eyes and sharper costumes. Even the original Lion-O, Larry Kenney, returned in a cameo as King Claudius, or Lion-O's father, thereby passing the torch to the new voice cast. When the show actually aired, critics and audiences initially responded well, so much so that the hour-long premiere episode in July 2011 drew about 2.4 million viewers and a strong 0.8 rating on cable, and reviews were largely positive. Many felt the show successfully captured the true spirit of the original while shedding some of the cheesier 80s traits. In fact, a few critics said that the reboot echoes the fun, wonder, and coolness of the classic characters and adds new layers. The tone was indeed darker, moodier, and character-driven, and they focused on the all-too-human flaws of the heroes. For example, young Lion-O in this version has to earn leadership and overcome self-doubt, rather than simply inheriting a title. Story arcs spanned multiple episodes, like the fall of Thundera, an exodus and quest narrative, and an overarching race between Lion-O and Mum-Ra to collect ancient power stones that would decide Third Earth's fate. All these elements made the 2011 ThunderCats feel more like a fantasy saga than a simple Saturday morning cartoon. Yet even as fans were getting invested, trouble lurked on the horizon, like Mum-Ra's logistic and monetary curses. One issue was something TV experts call the Friday night death slot. Cartoon Network scheduled ThunderCats at 8:30 p.m. on Friday nights. Traditionally, in American television, Friday evening is where shows go to die because at this hour, the young target audiences are often out of their homes or otherwise occupied, and overall TV viewership is low. For an action animation show trying to hook kids and teens, this slot was especially unforgiving. Indeed, the history of TV is littered with great series that perished on Fridays due to ratings dips. The original Star Trek is a famous example, nearly killed by NBC's Friday scheduling in the 60s. In the 2000s, networks recognized that young viewers don't stay home on Fridays, and advertisers won't pay top dollar for those time slots. Unfortunately, ThunderCats 2011 became a victim of this pattern. Its initial audience of over 2 million didn't hold, and as weeks went by, the numbers started to disappear. While the show maintained a dedicated fan base, casual viewers, especially kids, were often missing in action on Fridays. Then there was also the small matter of poor scheduling consistency. Cartoon Network sometimes shuffled the show's airtime or preempted it, making it hard for viewers to keep up. This perception that the network sabotaged its own show by moving it around might have some degree of exaggeration, but it only shows the frustration that fans had in their hearts. The bitter truth was that ThunderCats never became a must-see hit for the broader audience by Nielsen standards. By the end of its 26-episode first season, which wrapped in June 2012, viewership was averaging around 1.5 million, down from that strong start. In isolation, those numbers weren't disastrous, and were in fact decent for a cable cartoon. But you see, as is the case with many of these shows, the ratings alone weren't enough to secure a renewal. Why? Because, as with many animated series, the real battle wasn't just on screen, but on toy shelves. For Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers, ThunderCats needed to pull its weight as a merchandise mover. Toy sales, or lack thereof, are often the silent executioner of action cartoons. In the case of ThunderCats 2011, Bandai had rolled out an extensive toy line alongside the show's launch. They covered both angles, as in figures of the new versions of Lion-O, Panthro, Chitara, etc., as well as classic figures of their 1980s designs for the nostalgia collectors. The toys were cleverly designed with features like magnet-activated gear, the Thunderlink system, that would unlock gimmicks in vehicles like the Thunder Tank. They even made role-play toys like a Sword of Omens and Claw Shield so kids could play out adventures. In theory, it was a robust merchandise plan, yet it didn't translate into sales success. Retailers reported ThunderCats figures stagnating on shelves, and kids just weren't begging for them the way the toy makers hoped. Possibly the show's older tone meant that a lot of the viewers were nostalgic adults who might collect high-end toys, but not mass-market Bandai figures, while many kids who would want action figures weren't as tuned into this series. So it's safe to say that Warner made a show for older audiences and put it in a later time slot, but the toys were aimed at a younger demographic. And naturally, the coordination between content and merchandise was off-kilter. As a result, By the time Season 1 ended, ThunderCats merchandise was underperforming, and in the cold calculus of kids' TV, disappointing toy revenue is a death knell. So Cartoon Network in the early 2010s had a clear message to showrunners about selling the toys or saying goodbye. In fact, ThunderCats wasn't alone here. The network also canceled Young Justice and Green Lantern the animated series around the same time, explicitly because the toy tie-ins underperformed. And mind you, these shows had fervent fan followings. Another action series, Symbionic Titan, was axed after one season, literally because it had no toy line at all. So yeah, it was a harsh era for action cartoons. Beyond ratings and toys, there were other production challenges as well that nibbled away at ThunderCats 2011. The animation quality, which fans and critics loved, didn't come cheap. Much of the work was done in Japan by Studio 4 Degree C, and around 2011, unexpected factors caused costs to spike. The value of the Japanese yen rose against the dollar, meaning Cartoon Network's dollars didn't stretch as far as budgeted. By one account, a payment that would have been $100,000 ended up around $107,800 due to exchange rates shifting. This was around the same period as the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and Fukushima disaster, which shook Japan's economy. While ThunderCats production wasn't directly disrupted by the disaster, the stronger yen and possibly other cost considerations suddenly made each episode more expensive for the network than initially planned. In short, ThunderCats became a pricey show to produce at a time when Cartoon Network was tightening its belt. At the end of the day, we weren't getting the airtime, and it was challenging, art director Dan Norton reflected on the situation. The higher-ups saw a show pulling modest toy dollars, losing steam in ratings, and costing a lot in animation, a tough sell for renewal. And then came an unexpected competitor that proved to be the final nail in the ThunderCats coffin, and it was called Lego. In a story that's worthy of a ThunderCats plot, Lego almost saved the show, then ended up effectively replacing it. So what happened there? Well, during 2012, as Season 1 aired, Warner Bros. Was in talks with the Lego Group to create building sets based on various WB properties. ThunderCats was initially a part of those discussions, so we almost had Lion-O's Sword of Omens in brick form, or the Cat's Lair as a Lego playset. In fact, Lego reportedly began developing prototypes for ThunderCats sets, and the ThunderCats team was actively working on Season 2 concepts with a Lego partnership in mind. This could have been a merchandising lifeline, since Lego toys might succeed where action figures struggled. However, when Warner Bros. And Lego finalized their big partnership, which gave birth to the Lego Movie and more, ThunderCats was not included. Instead, Lego took many of the ideas, like anthropomorphic animal factions, a mix of medieval-style tribes and tech, and spun up its own original theme called Legends of Chima. In 2013, just a year after ThunderCats went off air, Lego's Legends of Chima premiered as both a toy line and an animated series. To fans of ThunderCats, Chima felt eerily familiar. It featured a lion prince called Laval of the Lion Tribe and his allies that included eagles, gorillas, etc., and they all battled this crocodile prince called Cragger of the Crocodile Tribe and other villainous animal clans over a power source called Chi. Laval even had spiky red hair and a big sword, much like Lion-O did. Essentially, Lego had taken the ThunderCats concept, filed off the serial numbers, and produced a hit kids franchise of its own. Dan Norton and team realized that once Chima hit the scene, their show was truly done for. As Norton put it, there was no way because it felt so borrowed. You can't take it from a serious thing to a kid thing and then try to reboot ThunderCats after that. The existence of Legends of Chima meant that Cartoon Network now had a lucrative animal fantasy toy cartoon, and Lego sets were flying off the shelves, so the incentive to revive ThunderCats 2011 evaporated. In an almost poetic way, the ThunderCats were usurped by by copycats. With all these forces against it, ThunderCats 2011 quietly met its end. After What Lies Above Part 2, the final episode of Season 1 aired, which by the way left many plot threads dangling, Cartoon Network made no renewal announcement. At San Diego Comic-Con 2012, the producers had to tell curious fans that the show was on hiatus with an uncertain future. By early 2013, it became clear that hiatus was really cancellation, and Dan Norton confirmed that no further episodes would be produced. It was an abrupt end, made more painful by the numerous cliffhangers and story arcs left unresolved. Over time, the creative team let slip details of what Season 2 and beyond would have been, and it's enough to make any ThunderCats diehard ache for what might have been. According to interviews and a 2017 podcast with the creators, Season 2 would have dramatically expanded the ThunderCats mythos. For example, we would learn that Mum-Ra had a direct hand in the creation of the Snarfs, possibly explaining why Snarf, Lion-O's pet, is more than a cute mascot, but actually ties into the ancient power balance. There were plans to reveal the history between Slythe, the Lizard General, and Lynxo, one of the elder ThunderCats not yet seen in the show, showing how the lizards came to side with Mum-Ra. The Thunder Kittens, Wily Kit and Wily Cat, were in for a wild arc. At one point, they'd be tricked by Mum-Ra into delivering the Sword of Omens to him, leading to them being sent to a mysterious place called Eldara, an adventure that would test the siblings on their own. Fans were particularly shocked to hear that Pumaira, the treacherous Thunderian introduced in Season 1, was set for much, much darker events. You see, Mum-Ra would transform Pumaira into a horrible insectoid monster as his agent to hunt the ThunderCats. If that sounds scary for a kid's show, well, the writers were truly going for high stakes. The grand quest for the 4 Power Stones would have continued, and we'd finally learn the name of the last stone, the Soul Stone, completing the set alongside the Tech, Spirit, and War Stones that had been mentioned. All these revelations barely scratch the surface of the Season 2 ideas floating around. Reportedly, there were notions of Lion-O undergoing 10 years of training in the Book of Omens, with a time skip in the story, and emerging older and wiser. There were potential crossovers or nods to other Rankin Bass creations like Silverhawks. One idea was to have the Silverhawks team appear via sci-fi travel. Even new family dynamics, such as the possibility that Tigra and Chitara would have a child, introducing Bengali as their son, and yes, even a controversial hint that adult Wily Kit could eventually become Lion-O's queen. All of this tantalizing material lives only in concept art and interviews now. The show we got ended on a hopeful note of, "We'll find the next stone," but the audience never got closure. The cancellation of ThunderCats 2011 was a bitter pill for its passionate fan community, but they didn't let the flame die. In late 2012, Cartoon Network's late-night Toonami block on Adult Swim picked up ThunderCats reruns and brought the series to more viewers, including many who missed it the first time around due to that ill-fated scheduling. From October 2012 to mid-2013, Lion-O and company prowled the 2:30 a.m. time slot on Toonami, often paired with Symbionic Titan as part of an action cartoon revival for Insomniac fans. This gave the show a second life of sorts, and it's one reason ThunderCats 2011 earned a cult status in subsequent years. As the years passed, appreciation for the 2011 series only grew. It helped that the show's entire run became easily accessible. Warner Brothers released it on Blu-ray, and streaming services, first Hulu, then later others, carried it, allowing binge-watching that highlighted the strength of its continuous story. I mean, people even organized online to talk about the 2011 show, be it forums, subreddits, or social media, and they shared concept art and scripts from the aborted Season 2, keeping hope alive that maybe, someday, the ThunderCats could roar again. This persistent fan buzz is likely one reason Warner Brothers tried a very different reboot in 2020, ThunderCats Roar. That version was a complete tonal whiplash, if you will. I mean, it was this brightly colored comedic take in a Cal Arts-esque style focused at much younger humans. ThunderCats Roar didn't last long, and lived only through one season of brief episodes, and was met with a mixed response at best. Many of the 2011 series fans were especially harsh on Roar because they felt it was a disrespectful parody of something they loved. But some would argue that Roar was Warner Brothers' course correction after the 2011 show proved that a more mature approach had trouble sustaining itself financially. Cartoon Network's priorities in the 2010s had changed, and they basically focused more on comedy, randomness, and simplistic styles that could produce breakout hits like Adventure Time, Regular Show, or Teen Titans Go. Additionally, these shows were cheaper to make and easier to churn out without a toy line gamble. In that climate, a lore-heavy, serious adventure like ThunderCats 2011 just didn't fit the network's strategy, unless it carried a huge merchandising upside. It's telling that Warner Brothers has since opted to license ThunderCats mostly for adult collector products, like high-end figurines by companies such as Super 7, rather than attempt another kids' action show in the same vein. Beyond business factors, it's worth noting that ThunderCats 2011 faced a unique challenge with its audience. It had to please two very different groups: the old-school ThunderCats fans who cherished the 1985 series, and a new generation with no preconceptions. This led to a bit of a split fan base. Many longtime fans adored the 2011 reboot for taking their childhood heroes seriously, exactly what they had fantasized about as kids. But others were more purist and criticized the changes in characterization and lore. For instance, in the original, Tigra was a wise, calm architect and elder warrior. In 2011, Tigra became Lion-O's adoptive older brother and was depicted as someone who was absolutely brash, cocky, and frequently butting heads with Lion-O. He even uses a high-tech pistol in addition to his whip, a far cry from the purely genteel Tigra of old. Some fans found this rivalry angle intriguing and fresh, others lamented that Tigra's mature mentor vibe was lost. Similarly, the reboot's Chitara was de-aged and placed in a love triangle between the brothers, eventually choosing Tigra. To some, this humanized the characters. To others, it was unwelcome teen dynamics in their ThunderCats. And perhaps the biggest sticking point was Snarf. The 1980s Snarf was a talking, goofy sidekick who often acted as comic relief. The 2011 team made Snarf a pet-like creature who did not speak, aside from making cute animal noises, and mainly served as a mascot and occasionally as a helper. This was quite divisive. A number of old fans were actually relieved. These were those who found the original Snarf annoying. Oh, and I am one of those guys, by the way. But a vocal contingent felt that making Snarf effectively a Pokemon took away an element of the original's charm. On the other hand, younger viewers or those new to ThunderCats often had no such baggage and could enjoy the show as is. In fact, many new fans drawn in by the anime styling had trouble going back to the very dated 1985 series after seeing the sophisticated 2011 version. This obviously led to online debates and wars about the question if ThunderCats 2011 was a faithful reboot or a radical reimagining. Some falsely believe that fans only loved the 2011 show for its anime action and mature themes, but that's not entirely true. We can't forget that the 2011 version was largely ThunderCats at its core. The reboot did honor a lot of the classic elements. I mean, think about it. Almost every major character from the old show appears in some form, and many classic episodes, like Lion-O's anointment trials, were slyly worked into the story. Still, it is true that the reboot's tone was a bit different. The original was optimistic, campy, and morally straightforward, a product of its time. The reboot was shaded in grays and was willing to let the heroes fail or make mistakes. In fact, the show often dabbled its claws in themes like racism, for instance, how Thunderian cats treated reptilians and other species, that the original only superficially touched. And I believe these were welcome changes that were made, bearing in mind the effect that cartoons can have on young minds. And let's be honest, who doesn't want to live in a world without oppression and racism? Well, actually, don't answer that here. Anyway, whether one prefers one version or the other comes down to personal taste. So what is the legacy of ThunderCats 2011? In many ways, it's become a cult classic as far as animated shows are concerned. You know, kind of like the Wanted 2008 of cartoons. Speaking of Wanted, that one has a whole other story, and did you know that it was actually inspired from a comic book? Yeah. Anyway, coming back to ThunderCats 2011, its single season is often held up as an example of an excellent show that was cut short by the business realities of TV. The term ahead of its time might be apt, because in the streaming era now, a show like ThunderCats might have thrived on Netflix or Amazon, where viewership numbers and toy sales mean less than subscriber engagement. Some fans actively campaigned for Netflix to rescue the series, especially after seeing Netflix successfully revive Voltron with a well-received new series. Though those efforts didn't pan out, hope never truly dies in the age of reboots. Warner Brothers has intermittently hinted at ThunderCats projects, like a long gestating, and by long I mean very and absolutely and pathetically long gestating live-action CGI film. In fact, the franchise still appears in merchandise and even crossovers, like when the ThunderCats teamed up with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in a comic not too long ago, and the characters occasionally cameo in other media too. The Toonami reruns and streaming availability ensured that the 2011 series kept finding new viewers, gradually building the recognition that, yes, this was something special. When one watches it now, it feels like a contained epic that ends on a frustrating cliffhanger, but the journey getting there is high-quality stuff. The music was a sweeping orchestral score by Kevin Cleach, and the voice acting, with talents like Will Friedle, Emmanuel Shrieky, D. Bradley Barker, and the legendary Clancy Brown, give it a feature film polish. If nothing else, ThunderCats 2011 proved that this franchise can be adapted for modern audiences in a serious, artful way, a point not lost on older fans who might have initially been skeptical. Lessons were learned from the rise and fall of ThunderCats 2011. For future reboots, and not just of ThunderCats but any classic property, it's a case study in balancing art, fans, and finance. Creatively, the 2011 team showed that respecting the source material while also innovating yields the best reception. They earned praise for layering the story and characters more deeply while still evoking the coolness of the original. But on the business side, it was a warning that you can pour love and talent into a revival, but if the show's target age group isn't clearly defined and reached, and if the ancillary product strategy misfires, the plug can be pulled irrespective of the show's quality. Perhaps if ThunderCats had premiered a few years later on a streaming platform with lower pressure for immediate toy profits, we might have seen all those planned story arcs unfold. On the fan management side, the lesson might be to communicate. Cartoon Network never explicitly announced the cancellation until fans had figured it out, which left a lot of people hanging and hoping in 2012-2013. An early confirmation might have even prompted fans to organize a Save Our Show campaign or drive up home media sales. Who knows? Nonetheless, ThunderCats 2011 remains a beloved entry in the franchise. In fact, it's arguably eclipsed the original series in critical esteem. Many fans today recommend newcomers watch the 2011 series as the definitive ThunderCats experience, with the caveat that it ends too soon.